This is the writer Fred. Today I want to talk to you about how European Americans really become irrational and delusional when discussing the relationship of European Americans to African Americans. And I want to start by going back in history, right after slavery, and what they put in, first of all, in the history books for Black African Americans to read. It's unbelievable. It's unreal. It's irrational. It's delusional. And let me read from Leon Litwick's book, Trouble in Mind. What little they learned, talking about the African Americans, of their own history consisted often of disparaging caricatures of black people as the least civilized of the races, irresponsible, thoughtless, foolish, childlike people satisfied with their lowly place in American life, incapable of self-control and self-direction. Delusional? Absolutely. Irresponsible, thoughtless, and foolish? This is all delusional. This is irrational thinking on the part of European Americans when it comes to African Americans. Let me continue. The history of black people was a history, and this is in the European Americans' books, for African Americans to use. Their history of black people was a history of submission, gladly endured, and of services faithfully rendered. Transported from the darkness of heathen Africa to a civilized and Christian New World, grateful slaves found contentment and happiness. Illustrations of blacks, if they appeared at all, depicted well-fed, carefree laborers frolicking in the fields, amiable, differential Uncle Toms, greeting their patronizing and loving, now in here they say masters, I refuse to use that word, so I'll say oppressors, hat in hand, evincing a demeanor of contentment, docility, and faithfulness to the oppressor. Folks, that's delusional. That's irrational. That's 1866. Let's fast forward. Let's fast forward till today. In a campaign stop in New Hampshire, a man refers to President Barack Obama as a dictator. And I mean that. He is a dictator, the man says. He doesn't want this country to get ahead. He doesn't want, and he's a Muslim. Now that's not enough just to be a Muslim. This man has to take it further. He's a black Muslim. Well, we all know that under our form of government, there's no way that President Obama can be a dictator. So that's the irrational behavior that we're talking about. He's a Muslim. Well, we all know he's not a Muslim. And certainly not he's a black Muslim, and there's nothing wrong with being a black Muslim. But in this man's thinking, that makes him not capable of serving and being president of the United States. Now, let me bring it even further up till today here in San Antonio, Texas. As you know, one of the big issues that's going on in our city is the renaming or not renaming of Robert E. Lee High School. 2 commentaries ago, I spoke on that subject and received some pretty acerbic responses. One, I want to read and show you how irrational and delusional European Americans are when it comes to this issue right here in San Antonio. This man writes, "You do know that Lincoln asked General Lee to head his military to fight the South. So that would mean that Lincoln had great respect for Lee." Yeah. Or what did Lincoln have the same respect after Lee said no, went and joined the Confederacy and fought against Lincoln's army? I'm pretty sure President Lincoln changed his mind. He goes on, "We should all have great respect for the great leader and person General Lee was." Well, I don't think Caleb Wilson and some of the other students over at the school, Robert E. Lee, have that kind of respect, and rightfully so, they shouldn't. Finally, and this always gets me when I read these kind of things. Also, when Lee's slaves were freed, They loved him so much that they stayed to work for him. Well, I researched that, folks, and I knew that wasn't true. So let me read a quote from this book, Remembering Slavery. And this is George Conrad. He was interviewed in 1939, and here's what he had to say about Lincoln and about Lee. Mr. Lincoln was sure a wonderful man. He did what God put him here to do, took bondage off the colored people and set them free. Now that's his opinion about Lincoln. Here's what he thinks about Lee. Mr. Lee sure didn't leave no such record behind him. They tells me before he died, he had a mule and a slave brought before him. And he told the folks to protect the mule and to keep the slave, he uses another word obviously, down. Now, I think that kind of counteracts what this man has said about how Lee's slaves loved him so much they wanted to stay with him. And I don't take offense to many statements because I get a lot of them because of my controversial positions. But I do to that one. How dare this man think that he has a right to say that our ancestors loved this European American so much, who had oppressed them, kept them in bondage, loved him so much they wanted to stay with him. And so that's why I think a lot of this stuff that you hear is delusional and irrational, coming from delusional, irrational people when it comes to talking about African Americans. This is this week's weekly commentary. I am making a social deposit into the dialogue pertaining to the political, economic, and social condition of black people in America. I'm looking for a return on my investment when you email me at fred@blackvideonews.com.